The rumors are true. Hamilton is back at Mercedes. But while TV only showed his press conference, do you want to know the shocking deal Toto Wolff offered him after the Hungarian Grand Prix? This video tells it all. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. There was a ghostly chill creeping through the corridors of Ferrari's headquarters. Not the kind caused by wind or weather, but by silence. A silence that clung to walls like guilt, that thickened the air, that made footsteps feel louder than ever before. Maranello, once alive with tradition, pride, and a near-religious devotion to racing glory, now felt like a cathedral mourning a fallen god. The aftermath of the Australian Grand Prix had left behind more than just shattered dreams. It had left scars. Deep, invisible, permanent. Lewis Hamilton, once seen as the chosen one to restore Ferrari's throne, now moved through that building like a man exiled in his own kingdom. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't breaking things. He didn't need to. The quiet, cold distance in his eyes was louder than any rage. He had crossed the line in Melbourne with nothing but regret in his mirrors. A car that refused to listen. A strategy that betrayed him. A garage that no longer felt like his. And then, with a microphone in his face and the world watching, he didn't sugarcoat it. I've driven every kind of car you can imagine. But this one, it's like piloting resistance. I give everything. I adapt. I push. And it pushes back. Harder. Every time. He didn't mention names. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. Leclerc had secured another front-row start. Hamilton hadn't made Q3. The math wasn't complicated. The implications, however, were devastating. Behind closed doors, the mood inside Ferrari's inner circle went from anxious to outright fractured. What had started as a philosophical disagreement had escalated into something dangerously close to a Cold War. There were two camps now, those who believed in Hamilton's feedback, and those who insisted the car was fine and he simply wasn't adapting fast enough. That tension erupted in full force just hours after the race. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Frederick Vasseur called Hamilton into a meeting. Just the two of them. No press officers. No engineers. No buffers. What was meant to be a conversation quickly turned into a showdown. According to multiple inside sources, Vasseur's tone was clipped. Defensive. Almost accusatory. He asked Hamilton what more he expected the team to do. Hamilton didn't flinch. I expected a partnership, he reportedly said. What I got was a wall. What Vasseur said next shocked even Ferrari's most veteran personnel. Maybe we made the wrong choice bringing you here. Hamilton didn't shout. He didn't even blink. That's the first honest thing anyone here's said to me all season. The room was quiet after that. Not out of respect, out of dread. The message was clear. The bridge between Hamilton and Ferrari leadership wasn't just burning. It was ash. In the days that followed, Hamilton didn't return to Maranello. He skipped internal meetings. He missed scheduled briefings. His side of the garage began operating independently, with reduced access to centralized data. Leclerc's engineers received new floor components in time for the next GP. Hamilton's team, they were told to wait one more weekend. And then the storm hit. A confidential technical review, never meant to leave the building, was leaked anonymously to several influential journalists. The report confirmed what Hamilton had been hinting at for weeks. The SF-25 had a built-in aerodynamic bias that favored Leclerc's aggressive entry technique. The car's rear-end instability wasn't a bug. It was a feature, perfect for one driver, but nearly undrivable for the other. The media exploded. F1 Twitter went into meltdown. Pundits called it favoritism. Former drivers called it sabotage. Fans demanded answers. Ferrari, meanwhile, locked down completely. No press conferences. No statements. Just silence. But silence can't stop the truth from spreading. By the time the paddock arrived in Suzuka, Hamilton had already begun moving behind the scenes. His management had quietly contacted multiple teams. Audi had expressed interest. McLaren had taken a meeting. Aston Martin had started doing calculations. Even Red Bull, though fully booked on paper, had begun discussing hypothetical opportunities for 2026. Hamilton hadn't made a decision, but Ferrari had made it easier for him to consider one. At the Japanese Grand Prix, his demeanor said everything. He arrived late. He left early. He didn't wave to fans. He didn't speak to media. On track, he drove like a man with nothing left to prove. No radio messages. No emotion. Just laps. P10. Another race. Another ghost performance. But that Sunday night, something shifted. Hamilton's longtime trainer, who rarely speaks publicly, posted a single word on social media. Unchain. It went viral in minutes. Speculation skyrocketed. Was he leaving? Was he being pushed? Was there a clause in the contract no one knew about? Back in Maranello, the internal structure of the team was cracking under pressure. Department heads were divided. Engineers started requesting transfers. The chassis development program was frozen. Even Leclerc, normally protected from the fallout, began to feel the tremors. At one point, during a routine post-practice analysis, Leclerc reportedly asked if Hamilton's data could be merged into his briefing for reference. The response from his race engineer: "We're keeping it separate now. Orders from above." Hamilton's reaction, when he found out, was pure ice. "Then I'm not a teammate. I'm a liability. Treat me like one." And he stopped attending full team briefings altogether. Now, heading into the European leg of the calendar, the tension has reached its final stretch. Ferrari promised major upgrades for Barcelona, but insiders say those upgrades are 90% Leclerc-centric. Hamilton's side of the garage? They're running out of time and patience. If those parts don't bring parity, Hamilton's exit may come much sooner than anyone expects. And if he leaves, it won't be a tearful farewell. It won't be a dramatic press conference. It'll be quiet, strategic, surgical, because Lewis Hamilton no longer needs Ferrari. But Ferrari still needs Lewis Hamilton. And that imbalance, more than any setup issue or chassis flaw, may be the real reason they're spinning out of control. He didn't come to Maranello to be part of a tribute act. He came to rewrite the ending. And if he can't do it here, he'll write it somewhere else. Long before the sun had set on the chaos of Melbourne, before the final interviews aired and the post-race analysis saturated every feed, one man had already pieced together what was really unraveling behind the scenes. Not a reporter. Not a team principal desperate for screen time. No. This man knew better than to chase the noise. Toto Wolff had watched in silence, perched far from the paddock, eyes cold, arms crossed, listening not to what Lewis Hamilton said, but to what he didn't. And in the spaces between Hamilton's carefully chosen words, in the barely contained frustration behind his eyes, Toto heard a truth louder than any radio transmission. Lewis was breaking. Not from a bad result. From betrayal. Ferrari had made a promise, one dipped in heritage, painted in romance, and sold as destiny. But what Lewis had walked into wasn't a project. It was a performance. And Toto had seen it coming. He hadn't said much when Hamilton made the move. He gave the press a few neat quotes. "We respect his decision. He's chasing history." But behind closed doors, Toto didn't need to speak. His silence was strategy, because deep down, he knew something no one else would say out loud. Ferrari wasn't ready for Lewis. And Lewis wasn't ready to be let down again. Meanwhile, Mercedes had tried to evolve. Russell, professional and precise, had become the public face. A reliable soldier. Antonelli, the raw young spark, had arrived to thunderous hype, but already the shine was fading. The weight of expectations was suffocating the Italian prodigy. Rookie mistakes had turned into viral clips. Confidence was leaking like oil from a damaged gearbox. Brackley was stable, but uninspired. Efficient, but empty. The soul had left with the legend. Then came Melbourne. Then came the quote. "I feel useless." 3 words that shattered the illusion. 3 words that said everything Toto needed to hear. It wasn't time to call a lawyer, or a sponsor, or an agent. It was time to call him. No intermediaries. No calendars. Just a direct, encrypted message. "Come alone. Midnight. Coordinates below." The meeting spot wasn't in any city guide. An abandoned aircraft hangar on the edge of the Australian desert. Cold metal. Broken glass. The scent of rust and gasoline. The kind of place where whispers echo louder than engines. When Hamilton arrived, he didn't speak. He moved like a man exhausted by ghosts, shoulders hunched, hoodie up, jaw clenched. This wasn't the icon millions adored. This was a man in retreat from the noise, the weight of expectation, and the bitter taste of reality. Toto stood by a vintage silver racing car covered in dust. Not a coincidence. A relic from another era. A reminder of what once was. "You picked a dramatic place," Lewis said, voice low. "I picked a quiet one," Toto replied. "Because you haven't heard quiet in months." There was a pause. A beat of pure silence. Then Toto spoke again, his voice sharper. "You're dying over there, Lewis. Not physically. Not professionally. But spiritually. I've seen it. You're not racing anymore. You're surviving." Lewis turned away, jaw tense. "They lied to me." "I know," Toto said. "They told you you'd lead. That they'd follow your vision. That you'd change everything." He stepped closer. "But they didn't want a general. They wanted a poster." Lewis laughed, hollow. "They said I'd be the future." "They meant you'd be the face of a future they already designed," Toto corrected. Lewis rubbed his temples, the fatigue oozing out of him. "I left everything behind." "And what did you find?" Toto asked, calmly but directly. "Commitment, consistency, courage." "No," Lewis said after a moment. "I found ceremony, red carpets, speeches, meetings where no one listens, engineers who build updates they don't understand. I'm not building a legacy there. I'm being used as a monument." Toto's voice turned to steel. "You were never meant to be worshipped. You were meant to win." He reached into his coat. No envelope this time. Just a small, black box. He opened it slowly, revealing a pair of racing gloves. Not new. Old. Torn slightly at the wrist. Hamilton's gloves from 2021. "I kept them," Toto said, "because I knew we'd need them again." Lewis stared at them, expression unreadable. "I can't just walk away," he said. "I'm not asking you to walk," Toto replied. "I'm telling you when the moment comes, when you finally stop sacrificing greatness for nostalgia, I'll have the seat warm, the engine tuned, the team ready." Lewis took a step closer. "You think the board would approve?" Toto didn't blink. "I don't need the board to remember who built the empire." The tension crackled in the air like an approaching storm. Toto dropped the gloves on the hood of the old car. "You gave Ferrari a chance to remember what winning feels like," he said. "But if they waste it, if they waste you, I'll give you a weapon. Not a ceremony." Lewis didn't answer. Not yet. But something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of the storm that had once consumed entire grids. A memory of domination. A hint of resurrection. Toto turned toward the exit, the desert wind creeping through the cracks in the hangar. "Don't let your silence become your legacy," he said. Then he disappeared into the night. Lewis stood there, alone, eyes locked on the gloves. He didn't put them on. Not yet. But he didn't walk away either. Because in the ruins of promises painted red, something silver was beginning to rise. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, unnoticed. Outside, the last echoes of Monza's grandstands faded into the twilight. Inside, the silence was deafening. Lewis Hamilton sat slouched on the edge of a leather sofa, elbows on knees, face buried in his hands. He wasn't injured. But something in him was shattered. Not in a way a doctor could diagnose, but in the way only someone who once burned with uncontainable purpose could understand. The door opened slowly. No knock. No announcement. Toto Wolff walked in like a shadow with weight. Not a stranger. Not a guest. But someone who belonged, even in enemy territory. He closed the door behind him, but said nothing at first. He simply watched. And then, with a voice that carried no judgment, just memory. "You don't look like you anymore." Lewis didn't lift his head. Toto stepped further into the room, each footstep deliberate. He wasn't here to criticize. He was here because he could no longer stay away. I saw it the moment you stepped out of the car, Toto continued. It wasn't just disappointment. It was something else. Emptiness. Disbelief. You've carried terrible cars before. But this isn't just a bad machine. It's a place that's bleeding you out slowly. Hamilton looked up finally. His eyes weren't red, but they were hollow, like something had been extinguished. You saw it coming, he said hoarsely. Didn't you? Toto nodded. Not because I'm a prophet, but because I've seen what happens when a fire like yours is trapped in a place that fears wild flames. Lewis chuckled bitterly. I thought I was going to make history. I thought I'd be the one to tame Maranello, to do what Vettel, Alonso, even Schumacher couldn't. They didn't need taming, Toto replied. They needed freedom. And so do you. But Ferrari doesn't do freedom. They do obedience. And you were never built for submission. Hamilton leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His voice trembled, just a little. I've tried everything, T. I've stayed late in meetings. I've defended the engineers. I've played politics in front of microphones. I've rewritten myself so many times just to fit into their damn system, I don't even recognize the man I see in the mirror. Toto walked to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the empty pit lane. Because they don't want the real you. They want a cleaner version. A controlled, calculated, corporate Hamilton they can dress in red and parade in front of shareholders. But that's not you. You were never built to be ornamental. You were born to command. Lewis stood, slowly, shoulders tense, voice rising now. They told me I needed to evolve, that I needed to adapt, that I needed to be less me. And I believed them. I thought it was the price of glory. You're not evolving, Toto said calmly. You're eroding. Silence. Then, softly, come back. Lewis blinked. What? Toto turned around, eyes firm, unflinching. Come home. Hamilton laughed, but there was no joy in it. Just exhaustion. You really think it's that simple? No, Toto replied. It's not simple. It's seismic. But it's necessary. I left. Publicly. I put on the red. I became their symbol. And what have they given you in return? Toto asked. A car that doesn't respond. A pit wall that second-guesses your instincts. A garage full of whispers instead of answers. Lewis rubbed his face. The press would eat me alive. They already are, Toto said. They smell blood. But what they don't realize is that lions don't bleed forever. Eventually, they remember who they are. Hamilton was quiet for a moment. Then his voice cracked. I'm tired, man. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling for photos after P7 finishes. Tired of pretending this isn't killing me inside. Toto stepped closer. You know why I'm here? Because I still believe in you more than anyone on that grid. Because I've seen what you are when the world writes you off. Because we built something sacred at Mercedes, and it's missing its heart. I'm not the same driver, Lewis whispered. You're better, Toto said without hesitation. Sharper. Wiser. Weathered, yes, but also unshakable. You faced politics, betrayal, disappointment, isolation, and still you showed up. That's not weakness. That's unfiltered greatness. Lewis stared at him, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. The cheers at Silverstone. The heartbreak of Abu Dhabi. The empty podiums in red. The way Brackley felt like home. How it smelled like victory. I don't want to crawl back, he said. You wouldn't be crawling, Toto replied. You'd be leading. Again. Hamilton took a long breath. What about George? Kimi? They're the future, Toto said. But you're the now. And right now, we need a general. Not a prodigy. Not a prospect. We need the war-tested one. The silence in the room shifted. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was charged. Alive. Like a storm was forming, and it knew its name. Lewis turned back toward the window. The Ferrari garage lights still glowed faintly in the distance. So close. So distant. So wrong. "Do you think it's too late?" he asked. Toto's voice was resolute. "It's only too late if you stop believing. And I haven't stopped." He walked toward the door, placing a hand on the frame. "When you're ready to race like yourself again, really race, we'll be waiting." He paused. Then, with quiet conviction, "We never stopped." The door clicked shut behind him, and Lewis Hamilton stood alone in the silence. Only he wasn't lost anymore. He was remembering. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the bruises, beneath the red, the silver flame was reigniting. Toto Wolff stood motionless, arms folded, gaze locked. The overhead lights in the Mercedes war room cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating fragments of past glory, trophies behind glass, faded championship blueprints, and helmets worn in battle. But all of that faded into the background. Because in front of him stood Lewis Hamilton, not the man from the headlines, not the icon from posters, but the fractured, sharpened version that had been forged in silence and shame. Toto studied him, not like a team principal sizing up a driver, but like a general reading the eyes of a soldier who had returned from exile. And then, finally, with no fanfare, he broke the silence. "No," he said, his voice steady as granite. "You're not who you used to be." Hamilton's eyes darkened. "You're better," Toto continued, walking slowly forward, words landing like thunder in a cathedral. "Because now you've bled. You've been broken, publicly, relentlessly, without mercy. You've stood on the wrong side of history and had to watch as others rewrote your story. And you're still standing." He leaned in just slightly, eyes unblinking. "That kind of hunger, that can't be taught. It can't be engineered. No simulator, no telemetry, no wind tunnel model can replicate what you carry inside you now." A charged stillness filled the air. The kind of silence that isn't quiet, it roars. Lewis said nothing at first. His throat tightened as memories crashed behind his eyes. The betrayal in Abu Dhabi, the cold machinery of Ferrari's politics, the moments he stared at his reflection wondering who he'd become. And then, finally, he spoke. A low whisper, but it carried enough weight to make the entire room seem smaller. "What about the deal?" Toto didn't blink. "I've already started the process." Hamilton nodded slowly, but his expression didn't soften. "And the partners?" "They'll circle back," Toto said without hesitation. "They always do. You think they left because you lost? No. They left because the narrative changed. But we're about to rewrite it. And they'll want their name on every headline." Another pause. Another question. This one with steel beneath the surface. "The press." Toto allowed himself a small smirk, full of precision and menace. "They'll eat it alive. They've been waiting for the Phoenix moment. You're the chaos. You're the redemption. You're the ratings. Just don't give them peace. Give them fire." Hamilton exhaled, jaw clenched. The mask was coming off. What remained wasn't the diplomat, or the ambassador, or the polished PR creation. What remained was something raw, stripped, and dangerous. Then came the final question. The one he had feared since the day he left Brackley. "The crew?" he asked, voice barely above a breath. "Will they even want me back?" Toto moved without hesitation. He stepped in, put a hand on Lewis's shoulder, firm, grounding, real. Not symbolic. Not performative. "They never stopped looking for your shadow in the garage," he said. "They never stopped believing you'd come back. Every lap George ran, every strategy they built, they were all secretly wondering when you would walk through that door again." Hamilton didn't respond. He didn't need to, because in that moment, something ancient and terrifying reawakened inside him. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't a return to comfort. This was a controlled detonation. The man they thought was gone, the king, the storm, the ghost in the mirrors, he hadn't vanished. He'd been underground, watching, listening, absorbing the disrespect, the mockery, the silence. And now, he was coming back with vengeance etched into his soul. Word spread through the paddock like an oil fire. Within 24 hours, phones were ringing in panic. PR managers scrambled to update statements. Sponsors sent frantic emails about brand realignment. Sky Sports requested emergency airtime. Red Bull began reviewing their contract clauses. Ferrari scheduled a closed-door crisis meeting. Charles Leclerc, silent. George Russell, blindsided. Max Verstappen, furious. The FIA, nervous. Because the moment the story leaked, Hamilton reuniting with Mercedes in 2026, everything shifted. Not just the driver market, not just the power structure, the soul of Formula One itself. Back in Brackley, Hamilton stood alone in the simulator room. The monitors glowed. The seat waited. His name had already been uploaded back into the system, Ham 44 pulsing softly on the digital screen. He slid in, strapped himself down, visor lowered. His hands gripped the wheel like it owed him something. And as the mock engine screamed to life, one thought echoed through every fiber of his being. Let them doubt me again. Just one more time. Because this wasn't a comeback. This was retribution. The dawn broke gently over the circuit, streaking the sky with soft pinks and golds, but beneath the glow of the morning light, the beating heart of Formula One was already preparing for war. The garages buzzed with the usual rhythm, mechanics rolling tires, engineers reviewing telemetry, and media teams rehearsing questions they believed would dominate the weekend. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Because while most of the paddock was still waking up to another day of racing, a confidential operation of the highest magnitude was already fully underway. Not in the pit lane. Not in the media center. But behind a locked door inside an unmarked room, where 3 laptops glowed in silence and the faces on the screens looked like they'd barely slept. On one end, Mercedes' legal vanguard. Polished, composed, and utterly relentless. On the other, Ferrari's top executives, caught somewhere between denial and desperation. This was no polite business conversation. This was a controlled implosion dressed up as a legal transition. Clauses were dissected. Deadlines scrutinized. Escape routes identified. And the driver at the center of it all? Lewis Hamilton, silent, focused, and already halfway out the door. This wasn't the timeline anyone had planned. Not Mercedes. Not Ferrari. Not the media. Hamilton's move to Maranello had been the sporting world's equivalent of a royal marriage. The headlines had screamed of legacy, of history, of unfinished business. But what no one had foreseen, what even Hamilton himself might not have fully anticipated, was how rapidly things would disintegrate beneath the surface. What began as tension had mutated into fracture. Miscommunication turned into alienation. And admiration. That had soured into political frost. Mercedes had sensed it first. Not through gossip or interviews, but through silence. Through subtle clues, the way Hamilton's tone shifted in press conferences, the way his post-race demeanor became more withdrawn. Through intermediaries, whispers reached Brackley. At first, they waited. Then they watched. And once the signs were undeniable, they moved. Toto Wolff was not a man who let opportunity pass twice. He'd lost Hamilton once, to a dream painted in Ferrari red. He would not lose him again. The plan was swift, precise, and executed in complete secrecy. Mercedes' legal team had spent weeks building the framework for an early release strategy. It wasn't about money, they had plenty. It was about timing, image, momentum. They didn't want Hamilton back at the end of 2025. They wanted him in the car before the summer break. Before Ferrari could spin a narrative. Before the paddock caught on. They wanted him back now, to finish what he never truly got to complete. Back in Italy, panic was setting in. The corridors of Maranello, once filled with champagne dreams and bold declarations, now echoed with anxiety. Executives scrambled to rewrite the narrative. Vasseur, once arrogant in his recruitment of Hamilton, was now reduced to making frantic calls, sending private messages, and offering impossible promises to try to salvage what had already collapsed. He'd underestimated the fallout, the emotional weight, the psychological impact of trying to manage a legend as if he were an ordinary driver. He thought Hamilton would assimilate. Instead, Hamilton exposed the dysfunction. And now Ferrari's board, proud, powerful, political, was livid. What had once been seen as the team's triumphant resurrection had become an international embarrassment. Every leak, Every rumor, every awkward press appearance was fuel on the fire. Vasseur's approval ratings, both inside the team and out, were plummeting. Engineers were questioning direction. Sponsors were raising eyebrows. And behind it all was a realization too painful to say aloud. They hadn't just failed Hamilton. They had pushed him away. Inside the garage, the tension had become unbearable. The vibe was no longer combative, it was cold. Mechanics who once joked freely now worked in silence. Communication was rigid. Strategic meetings were clinical. The emotion, the unity, the passion that Ferrari had promised? Gone. And at the center of this unraveling web sat Charles Leclerc. Conflicted, angry, disappointed, not in Hamilton, but in the team. In himself. In the situation he was never meant to inherit. He had never seen himself as the villain. He wasn't out to dethrone anyone. But over time, he had been positioned, intentionally or not, as the favored son. The chosen future. The one the team would protect, even if it meant sacrificing the legend they had just signed. Charles had tried to stay neutral, to be professional. But he wasn't blind. He saw how Hamilton was being isolated, how his feedback was being diluted, how the decisions made behind closed doors always seemed to favor red over reason. He tried to speak to Lewis. Quiet moments after debriefs. Eye contact across the garage. But Hamilton no longer had words for anyone. Not because of arrogance, but because of clarity. Because he'd seen enough, experienced enough. And now, his silence was louder than any outburst could have been. Leclerc carried a quiet guilt, not because he pushed Hamilton out, but because he hadn't been able to stop it. He knew Ferrari was rigid. He knew the culture was proud. But even he hadn't anticipated how quickly they would chew up a champion and spit out a scapegoat. Meanwhile, at Mercedes HQ, plans shifted into action. A new chassis was quietly prepared. Media strategy was crafted down to the minute. And the messaging, it would be elegant, diplomatic, and utterly devastating. Lewis Hamilton returns to Mercedes. That would be the headline. But the subtext would burn. He left not because he failed, but because Ferrari did. When the news dropped, when the carefully timed statement was released to the press, when the paddock caught fire, when social media exploded and team principals were ambushed by reporters, the real message would be clear to everyone who understood the sport's politics. Hamilton hadn't just left a team. He had abandoned a dynasty that refused to evolve. He hadn't turned his back on Ferrari. Ferrari had turned its back on what greatness looks like when it asks to lead instead of obey. And now, the lion was returning to his den, not wounded, not broken, but recalibrated, refocused, reignited. The paddock would act shocked. The headlines would scramble to catch up. But Mercedes already knew the truth. Hamilton was coming home. And this time, he wouldn't be hunting records. He'd be hunting revenge. He didn't flinch when the notification arrived. He was already awake, already aware. There was no element of surprise left. The explosion had just been waiting to go off. And now it had. There it was, in bold font, pinned to the top of every F1 journalist's feed, plastered across news tickers, echoed on every platform from Twitter to TikTok to the bottom bar of CNN. Scuderia Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton have jointly agreed to terminate their agreement, effective immediately. No fireworks. No photos. No quotes. Just the clinical closure of a dream that had withered in silence. It was over. Publicly. Officially. Irrevocably. The line between respect and regret had never looked thinner. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. Because exactly 63 minutes after the Ferrari statement dropped, the world caught fire again. From the most unexpected silence, Mercedes sent out a missile in the form of a tweet. He's coming home. Hamilton x Mercedes. 2025. Just that. No sponsor logos. No dramatic teaser videos. Just a thunderclap in text form. And the world collapsed and rebuilt itself all at once. Within 10 minutes, fan pages began live streaming. The Hamilton subreddit hit meltdown. F1 podcasts scrambled to record emergency episodes. Live reaction videos flooded YouTube. Streamers wept on Twitch. Ex-teammates dropped cryptic emojis on Instagram. Sky Sports abandoned its scheduled programming. ESPN ran the tweet in a breaking banner for the next hour. Because it wasn't just news. It was resurrection. And while the rest of the motorsport community gasped, celebrated, speculated, or scrambled, Lewis didn't blink. He was already on the move. His belongings at Ferrari had been boxed the previous week. His sim rig in Monaco had already been updated with Mercedes telemetry. His legal team hadn't just negotiated an exit, they'd orchestrated a return. Quietly, ruthlessly, strategically. Every move had been a step toward this. Back in Brackley, the factory lit up like Christmas Eve. Phones rang non-stop. Staff sprinted through corridors. Departments that had been surviving were now surging. People didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They knew what was coming. They had seen this movie before. But this time, the stakes were higher. The comeback wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't ceremonial. It was tactical. It was personal. It was about finishing what never should have been interrupted. Toto Wolff stood before the senior engineering team and said it plainly. We're not rebuilding. We're revenging. The W15B was being stripped and reassembled at record speed. A new variant, codenamed LH Phoenix, was already underway. Not an evolution. A revolution. With one goal, create a car that Lewis could drive like an extension of his mind. And for the first time in years, Lewis walked into the simulator bay grinning. Not the practiced media smile. A real one. The kind of grin that told the team, I'm back because I choose to be, not because I had to be. Technicians watched him slide into the seat like he'd never left. Every lap was a statement. Every corner exit, a declaration. They watched as he drove like a man possessed, not by anger, but by freedom. No political games. No power struggles. No cultural resistance. Just data, silence, and intent. And beside the sim screen, a familiar figure appeared, Peter Bonington. No speech. No fanfare. Just a headset. A nod. A shared look. Radio check, Lewis said. Loud and clear, mate. As if nothing had ever changed. In those moments, the old Mercedes DNA reawakened. The empire of dominance didn't just remember its king, it rearmed him. And across the paddock, panic spread like wildfire. Ferrari tried to regain control of the narrative. Vasseur issued a vague statement. Leclerc dodged questions. But behind closed doors, damage control was in overdrive. Sponsors called emergency meetings. Internal emails flew across departments. The air in Maranello was thick with blame, regret, and a haunting question. What have we done? The answer echoed in garages around the world. They had reignited a beast. In Red Bull's hospitality unit, eyebrows were raised. In Woking, the McLaren design office suddenly shifted its upgrade plans. At Aston Martin, whispers spread about a renewed push for late-season gains. Because everyone knew the truth. 2025 was no longer about who was ahead. It was about who could survive what was coming. Lewis Hamilton wasn't just returning. He was returning with fire in his eyes and a purpose that went beyond points and podiums. This was legacy in motion. Legacy sharpened by pain. By silence. By months of watching his name become a pawn in someone else's strategy. No more. He didn't care what the headlines said. He didn't need to prove anything. He was done asking for permission. And as the sun set over Imola, the garages buzzed, but all eyes drifted toward one paddock. The silver one. The one that didn't say much, but suddenly seemed to carry the weight of destiny. Because deep inside that garage, a familiar shape was being molded. And when it's ready, when the lights go out in Bahrain next year, it won't just be a car. It will be a weapon. One that belongs to a man who was underestimated, underutilized, and now uncontrollably unleashed. He's not back to compete. He's back to take what was his all along. And for the first time in years, the grid isn't wondering if he'll win. They're wondering, who can stop him now?